to the 162nd meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security, the Honourable David McGuinty and Rennie Marcoux. So thank you to both of you for coming and presenting the annual report of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, which has the unfortunate name of NSICOP or something like that. And I'm sure that Mr. McGuinty will explain in his own inimitable style what NSICOP actually does. So with that, welcome Mr. McGuinty to the committee, and we look forward to your comments.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. It's a privilege to be here with you today to discuss the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians' 2018 annual report. Thank you for your invitation to appear before your committee. I am joined by Rennie Marcoux, Executive Director of the Secretariat to the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, or NSICOP, as it is known. The committee's first annual report is the result of the work, the dedication, and the commitment from my colleagues on the committee. It's intended to contribute to an informed debate among Canadians on the difficult challenges of providing security and intelligence organizations with the exceptional powers necessary to identify and counter threats to the nation, while at the same time ensuring that their activities continue to respect and preserve our democratic rights. Le CPSNR.
The mandate of the NSICOP is to review the overall framework for national security and intelligence in Canada, including legislation, regulations, policy, administration, and finances. It may also examine any activity that is carried out by a department that relates to national security or intelligence. And finally, it may review any matter relating to national security or intelligence that a minister refers to the committee.
The committee are all clear to a top secret level, swear an oath, and are permanently bound to secrecy. Members also agree that the nature of the committee, multi-party, drawn from the House of Commons and the Senate, and with a broad range of experience, brings a unique perspective to these important issues. In order to conduct our work, we are entitled to have access to any information that is related to our mandate. But there are some exceptions, namely cabinet confidences, the identity of confidential sources or protected witnesses, and ongoing law enforcement investigations that may lead to prosecutions. 2018 was a year of learning for the committee. We spent many hours and meetings building our understanding of our mandate and of the organizations responsible for protecting Canada and Canadians. The committee was briefed by officials from across the security and intelligence community and visited all 7 of the main departments and agencies. Numerous meetings were also held with the National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister. NSICOP also decided to conduct a review of certain security allegations surrounding the Prime Minister's trip to India in February 2018. Over the course of the calendar year, the committee met 54 times, with an average of 4 hours per meeting. Annex C of the report also outlines the committee's extensive outreach and engagement activities with government officials, with academics, and civil liberties groups. The annual report is the result of extensive oral and written briefings, more than 8,000 pages of printed materials, dozens of meetings between NSICOP analysts and government officials, in-depth research and analysis, and thoughtful and detailed deliberations amongst committee members. The report is also unanimous. In total, the report makes 11 findings and 7 recommendations to the government. The committee has been scrupulously careful to take a non-partisan approach to these issues, and we hope that our findings and recommendations will strengthen the accountability and the effectiveness of Canada's security and intelligence community. Le rapport devant vous aujourd'hui.
The annual report before you today contains 5 chapters, including the 2 substantive reviews conducted by the committee. The first chapter explains the origins of NSICOP, its mandate, and how it approaches its work, including what factors the committee takes into consideration when deciding what to review. The second chapter provides an overview of the security and intelligence organizations in Canada, of the threats to Canada's security, and how these organizations work together to keep Canada and Canadians safe and promote Canadian interests. Those two chapters are followed by the committee's two substantive reviews for 2018.
The way that the government determines its intelligence priorities. Why is this important? There are three reasons. First, this process is the fundamental means of providing direction to Canada's intelligence collectors and assessors, ensuring they focus on the government's and the country's highest priorities. Second, this process is essential to ensure accountability in the intelligence community. What the intelligence community does is highly classified. This process gives the government regular insight into intelligence operations from a government-wide lens. And third, this process helps the government to manage risk. When the government approves the intelligence priorities, it is accepting the risks of focusing on some targets and also the risk of not focusing on others. Le comité a conclu que le
The committee found that the process, from identifying priorities to translating them into practical guidance to informing ministers and seeking their approval, does have a solid foundation. That said, any process can be improved. In particular, the committee recommends that the Prime Minister's National Security and Intelligence Advisor should take a stronger leadership role in the process in order to make sure that Cabinet has the best information to make important decisions on where Canada should focus its intelligence activities and its resources.
Chapter 4 reviews the intelligence activities of the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. The government's defence policy, strong, secure, engaged, states that DND-CAF is, quote, the only entity within the Government of Canada that employs the full spectrum of intelligence collection capabilities while providing multi-source analysis, close quote. We recognize that defence intelligence activities are critical to the safety of troops and the success of Canadian military activities, including those abroad, and are expected to grow. When the government decides to deploy the Canadian Armed Forces, DND-CAF also has implicit authority to conduct defence intelligence activities. In both cases, the source of authority is what is known as the Crown prerogative. This is very different from how other intelligence organizations, notably CSE and CSIS, operate. Each of those organizations have clear statutory authorities to conduct intelligence activities, and they are subject to regular, independent, and external review. This was a significant and complex review for the committee, with 4 findings and 3 recommendations. Our first recommendation focuses on areas where DND-CAF could make changes to strengthen its existing internal governance structure over its intelligence activities and to strengthen the accountability of the minister. The other 2 recommendations would require the government to amend or to consider enacting legislation. The committee has set out the reasons why it formed the view that regular, independent review of DND-CAF intelligence activities will strengthen accountability over its operations. We believe that there is an opportunity for the government, with Bill C-59 still before the Senate, to put in place requirements for annual reporting on DND-CAF's national security or intelligence activities, as would be required for CSIS and CSE. Second, the committee also believes that its review substantiates the need for the government to give very serious consideration to providing explicit legislative authority for the conduct of defence intelligence activities. Defence intelligence is critical to the operations of the Canadian Armed Forces, and like all intelligence activities, involves inherent risks. DND-CAF officials expressed concerns to the committee about maintaining operational flexibility for the conduct of defence intelligence activities in support of military operations. The committee therefore thought it was important to present both the risks and the benefits of placing defense intelligence on a clear statutory footing. Our recommendations are a reflection of the committee's analysis of these important issues. Merci. Il nous ferait plaisir de...
Thank you. We would be pleased to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. McGuinty. Mr. Picard, 7 minutes, please.
Merci. Alors, bienvenue.
Thank you and welcome. From experience, I can see that there's a good deal of enthusiasm with this new committee. It seems to be a basic approach, a good thing to get things underway. The committee is a new committee, and it is currently on a good learning curve. And it is a good addition to our current structures and will allow us to better understand what our intelligence agencies are doing. So what is the added value of having this body? What does the committee bring to the table that we didn't have in the past? Thank you for the question. Let me begin by saying, well, added value, the first thing is that the members of the committee have access to all classified documentation and material and presentations, as well as the witnesses. This is extremely helpful when you have direct access to in-depth material to work with. Second, I believe that the committee has shown this year that it is quite likely that parliamentarians can bring together all parties from both houses of the Parliament of Canada and work in a nonpartisan fashion. I think that the current time and context leads itself to partisan style, and we decided from the very outset, as good colleagues, that we would leave that partisan approach at the door when we stepped into our meetings, because of the importance of the work before us and the nature of the questions, the issues about national security. They are just far too important. We can't simply allow them to become part of the push and pull of normal everyday politics. We encountered many difficulties during the year. We had to get the plane up and running, and as we were reading the operating manual, we had 10 people, $3.3 billion a year. But we are proud of what we accomplished. Into a more technical question. Let me go back to your comment about military intelligence. You drew a link between intelligence agencies and bodies, for example, CSIS, and the Canadian security establishments and other bodies involved in intelligence, and the sort of overall global spectrum of intelligence. Are the services similar from one body to another, or is military intelligence of a broader nature than what is covered by the other bodies? If we have the government look more closely at military intelligence, how can it really decide what proper behavior would be? Should we use the approach used in other countries? How should we evaluate our military intelligence? We must keep in mind that the statutory powers of the Minister of Defense remains a Crown prerogative.
It's several centuries old. It's a very old vestigial power vested in the Crown that allows countries, for example, to deploy troops, prosecute wars, and conduct foreign policy. The powers vested today in CSIS and CSE, for example, also sprang forth from the original concept of the Crown prerogative. But as a result of evolving, both of those organizations now have four corners of a statute within which to operate. They have their own law. They have their own enabling legislation. And by its own admission, the Department of National Defense and the government's white paper, it's defense paper indicates that it's the only full spectrum organization in the country. In other words, it does what CSIS, CSC, and the RCMP do combined. It also plans on expanding the number of intelligence personnel by 300 over the next several years. It is a major actor in the intelligence sphere. And so we took a long, hard look at the statutory footing on which it's operating and began to ask some difficult probative questions. And the report tries to walk a fine line between the merits of the government considering a statutory footing, new legislation, and some of the risks inherent which the department has brought to our attention. And we've been very careful in the report to put it in very plain black and white for people to understand. But in so doing, we wanted to simply raise the profile of this issue and ignite a debate not only amongst parliamentarians, but in Canadian society.
Thank you. For the remaining time, my last question would be one of your findings at page 54 about, well, it says, number 7, performance measurement for the security and intelligence community is not robust enough to give Cabinet the context it needs to understand the efficiency and effectiveness of the Security and Intelligence Committee. Do we have any example of prejudice caused by the lack of effectiveness? And would you expand on this finding, please?
Microphone.
So I'll answer the question. I think what we've indicated in the report is that we did not have access to the actual documents of Cabinet since it's a limit in our legislation. But what we saw was all the discussions, the briefing material, the minutes of meetings leading up to that. And I think it's the overall process from start to finish where we identified that the result being that Cabinet did not get enough in terms of what are the risks, what are the benefits, where are the gaps in collection, where are the gaps in assessment, could we contribute more to the alliance? So it's the whole gamut of information that we felt in terms of measurement of performance of the community that could be better.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Picard.
Thank you.
Mr. Palus, 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur McGuinty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Mr. McGuinty and Ms. Marcoux. In your report, at page 29, paragraph 70, you speak of espionage, spying, and foreign influence. When it comes to the elections, the upcoming elections in particular, do you think that an election campaign is under threat at present? The committee did not look into this issue in depth. We didn't look at the integrity of the Canadian elections. But do you think that this is a national security issue, the potential influence by foreign entities over our elections? Because in this paragraph 70, you say that Russia and China are identified as and recognized to be important actors of political influence. And you're speaking of political influence and influence over political parties as well. So this seems to be stated in your report. Is the committee presently able to take any steps to prevent, let's say, the Chinese government from influencing our elections? Two things. We referred to Russia and China in our report because we were relying on open sources. This thus was repeated in the report, or picked up and added to the report. In 2019, we have announced that one of our reviews will be about foreign interference. And we'll have a good deal more to say about this in good time when our report is ready. But we won't get the report from you before the next election campaign. No, probably not. So about the trip to India. When you studied this and reviewed it, I imagine it's because there was some sort of national security issue involved. Yes. Now we have Minister Goodale, who came to see us in the committee on the hearings about C-59, I believe, and Mr. Goodale said that he couldn't answer our questions about this because it was a national security issue. But in the House, Mr. Goodale said the opposite. Daniel Jacques came to testify here and said that it was not a national security issue. So is it a national security issue or not? In the report, We clearly indicated in the letter that I sent to the Prime Minister, and I could read from it in our references here, we had examined the allegation of foreign interference, of risk to the security of the Prime Minister, and inappropriate use of intelligence. So the report touches on these three issues. And obviously, we had to redact some of the material, the Minister of Justice, and the report was revised based on the redaction. In your report, we see as well that the Prime Minister's office did not carefully look through the names of visitors that were invited, and there was an error of judgment. So how should we be responding to that? Could you repeat that? Yes, the trip to India. In the report, we see that the Prime Minister's office did not correctly review the visitor list, that there was an error of judgment. Should anyone be answering to this? So have we a government response to our recommendations on that? No, we don't have a response on either of the two reports yet. All right, so you have tabled your reports, but there's no follow-up yet, no response. The committee hopes that there will be a government response, a follow-up. We're waiting for it, and we've brought this up with the appropriate authorities. Yes. Because when the committee was created, we see that based on this report and the serious nature of your activities with your colleagues of all parties involved with you, I think there's goodwill here and serious work being carried out. But we've always wondered just what this good would come of this. If serious things are identified and reports are tabled, well, the Prime Minister still has to respond. So our concern from the very outset when this committee was created was that, yes, very well, we can have information, and some of that information, of course, is top secret, so that cannot be communicated publicly. But when the Prime Minister is involved, we wouldn't expect a public response. But you, as the chair of the committee, do you expect as a minimum that the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office would respond to your studies, what you table? Yes. Yes, we do. So C-59 in your notes, you speak of recommendations regarding DND. We know that C-59 is now before the Senate. I'm not sure at what stage of reading, but do you think that the government will submit amendments? Have you heard about this? Our role is to present our reports to the government. We have done so, and we expect the government to take serious note of our reports.
National Security and Intelligence Review Agency will have the power to review the Department of National Defense, but will not be obligated to do so on an annual basis, like it will for CSIS and CSE. The committee was unanimous in calling for NCIRA to have that annual responsibility built into the bill in C-59 so that these extensive activities at the Department of National Defense and Intelligence were reviewed on an ongoing basis.
Dans votre travail, vous avez parlé de plusieurs.
In your work, you've mentioned having many hours of committee work under your belt. What's the main issue that you have discussed or that you've experienced? In what way? Well, when you have an inquiry to carry out, a review to carry out, and need information, do you have access to the information easily? Yes, we do. So the doors are open for you? The departments are willing and able to help you? Yes, well, sometimes we ask for so much documentation, there's quite a lot of volume, and it becomes difficult for our members to handle it all, but we have superb analysts and a great secretariat supporting us. From time to time, we do have to put a bit of pressure on the departments or bodies or agencies that we are requesting information from, but we've only been at this for 17, 18 months now, so would you like to add anything? What we note mostly is the difference between bodies which have already been reviewed, RCMP, CSE, RCMP, that are used to providing classified information, and other bodies or departments which are not used to doing so, and thus need to set up a triage center, a way to go through their documents as they send them over to us to ensure that internal services or services within departments recognize that we are a committee that has quasi-absolute right to access information in the hands of attorneys, for example. So all this is a learning curve. Thank you, Mr. Poirier. Mr. Dubé. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here today to our witnesses. Let me thank you for the work that you've carried out. Thanks to you, the committee members have carried out excellent work as well. Given that this is the first time we're hearing from you and that we're asking some technical questions to better understand your work, don't take it as criticism, please. First, I would like to know the follow-up on recommendations that you make. You know, when the Auditor General, for example, tables a report, very often the Public Accounts Committee will hear representatives of various departments on that report. A little more complicated with you. First, the information needed to follow up may be classified. Moreover, you're not necessarily able to use the political mechanisms that sometimes are needed to ensure accountability. Do you think it would be appropriate to have a committee such as ours follow up with various departments that are named in your recommendations? That's a matter that members of our committee discussed at some length. How would we be able to exert influence, ensure that our recommendations were adopted? We have spoken of many possibilities, one being that the Security Commissioner, in the annual report, the recommendations that have not been picked up on would roll over into the annual report of the Security Commissioner. That's something that we are thinking about. On a day-to-day basis, though, we are in touch with the people involved. For example, picking up on Mr. Poilus's question again, the Minister of National Defense, the DND rather, has never been examined from the outside by a committee of parliamentarians such as ours that would have access to internal material, DND, CAF material. Given that we are looking more closely at DND, they have, for the first time in their history, created a group, an internal group of personnel available to answer all our questions and respond to our requests. Thank you. I'm terribly sorry if I'm moving on to another question. I have limited time. Another matter, going back to the question that was asked about interference. You spoke of a study that should be tabled or at least finished before the 3rd of May, if I'm not mistaken. So, if I've understood correctly, there may be some possibility that this will not be tabled in the House before the summer recess. Is that correct? We are working as fast as we can. We are putting in many extra hours. We are really trying very hard to complete the report. 3 or 4 reviews are involved. The problem is the legislation provides for tabling report 30 days after any redacting is carried out. Oh, I understand. Well, I understand you're working hard, but I nevertheless have to ask you whether you're satisfied with the delays between the report's arrival in the PMO's office and your ability to table it in the House. Yes, that is a good question. There might be, when we come to review the Act, our constituting Act in 5 years, to review that timeline and change it. So you've identified that correctly. Yes, especially something could be of use, especially coming up to elections. In paragraph 49, you speak of the expense account. And there are some Australian figures here and some Canadian figures that have been redacted. I'm wondering why the Australians decided that it was appropriate to share these figures with the public, even with Canadians, but that we can't share ours. Yes, we asked that question of the government when we saw that the information was redacted. And are you able to share any answer you received? They said that this was a classified matter and they did not want to communicate the details. That's interesting, especially given that Australia is one of the Five Eyes. And another question that I have, if I have the time for it, is indeed about the redaction process. Now, this may seem an odd question, but when it comes to having a summary statement and overall a coherent document, Is it the committee that decides how to write up your summary? We at the Secretariat of NSICOP, once we've seen the paragraphs or sections or sentences that have been redacted, we decide how to cobble this together into complete sentences and provide a full summary. The Secretariat draws up the summary. Very well. Now, the choice of asterisks, this is the British model, if I'm not wrong on this. Indeed, it is. Now, we were speaking of national defense and the recommendation, possibly, of amending C-59 and the mandate that might give the committee. Do you are concerned about the resources that a second committee would have to carry out these extra reviews, given that your means are already somewhat restricted? If there's an even broader mandate, are you concerned that the extra work wouldn't get done every 2 years? I certainly hope it would be, but do you think they would be able to carry this out with the resources that are now planned for? We're not really aware of what appropriations the new committee would have access to. We know that it would have access to more funding than our Secretariat, given that the mandate would be broader, but we don't have a clear figure. But we certainly agree that the other body would need adequate resources to cover its mandate. One last question, 15 seconds left. When you list the criteria needed to require review, are the criteria sufficient but not sufficient or necessary or sufficient? It's a bit of a guide, I imagine, that you give the public so that we can see what you're doing, but you don't give all the details. That's correct.
England and then Mr. Graham.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. Mr. McGuinty, Madame Marcoux, thank you very much for being with us. Congratulations on tabling the report. Mr. McGuinty, in addition to chairing the NCCOP, which is a committee of parliamentarians, not a parliamentary committee, you also chair the Canadian group of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, or IPU, which is the umbrella organization for the world's parliaments, founded in 1889. This puts you in a very unique position to comment on the role of parliamentarians on two fundamental policy objectives that are very live around the globe today. One is the fight against terrorism and also violent extremism in all of its forms. And the other is the fight for diversity and inclusion, the fight for gender equality, the fight against racism, and the fight for LGBTI rights. And I'm wondering if I could invite you to comment on your perspectives, your reflections on the role of parliamentarians on these two issues, and drawing on the two roles that you currently hold.
Thank you for the question. I think one of the things that we've been hearing as a new committee, as we interface with our colleagues in Australia, the United States, Britain, New Zealand, the Five Eyes and beyond, is that countries, parliaments worldwide are struggling with this this tension between the granting of exceptional powers for security purposes and the ways in which those powers are exercised with the protection of fundamental rights to privacy, freedom, charter rights in the Canadian context, for example. So we're not alone on this journey. Many countries have reached out to NCCOP already. Ms. Marcoux was over in Europe speaking to a number of countries who were fascinated by our approach. We've been invited to countries like Colombia and elsewhere to help them build capacity in this regard. I think it's not necessarily only a Canadian challenge. It's obviously a global one with the rise of violent extremism and terrorist activity. But we have to make sure that we get this balance right. And I think that's what the government's intention was when NCCOP was created. And it certainly is the informing ethic amongst all the members of all parties who sit on the committee now.
If you were to put your finger on the one most important aspect of parliamentary dialogue in an unencumbered setting like the IPU, where there is no ministerial direction, the reconciliation between these two policy objectives, what would that role be for a parliamentarian such as yourselves and ourselves here on the committee?
I think the secret sauce in the work that we're doing is nonpartisanship. And I think if we learned how to work together in a more nonpartisan fashion in many critical areas that we're facing as a country and as a planet, security being one, climate change being another, we might actually do better by our respective populations, our people we represent. And I think that that is integral to being able to treat issues like national security and that balance between security and rights.
Thank you very much. I'll hand it over to my colleague.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McGinty, I'd like to put it on the record that without your mentorship as a staffer many years ago, I probably wouldn't be at this table today. So thank you for that. I'm happy to see that you're... No, I'm happy to see your considerable skills and experience put to use in this important work, which is very far from the public eye. To wit, Chapter 2 makes frequent reference to Canadians not appreciating the extent of our intelligence services or understanding the various roles. What's the most important fact or thing you want Canadians to understand about what that they don't understand today?
Thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Graham. We were struck early on in our steep learning curve how little Canadians knew about the security and intelligence community in the country. Who were the actors? What were their powers? How did they cooperate? How did they not cooperate? How could things be improved? What are the threats facing the country? We saw some astonishing polling results about the lack of information in Canadian society, despite the fact that we've got good agencies and departments putting out good information. Canadians are not ferreting out that information, not understanding it, not collating it. So we decided on a foundational go-forward basis to provide some 32 pages at the front end in this chapter to give Canadians a bit of a survey, a security and intelligence 101 survey course in plain English. One of my favorite tests that I apply all the time in the committee is if you can't stop anybody coming off a Canadian bus or a train or a commuter vehicle and put this report in front of them and have them understand it, you failed. So we've tried to write and deliver information here for Canadians to understand what's going on in the country in a way that they can get. Canadians do get this. They get it perfectly well. It's just that we haven't, I think, taken the time necessarily to put it in a format and in a way that they can understand it and digest it. So that's the purpose of that 34 odd pages, to paint a picture and a mosaic of what is going on. And at the same time to show Canadians historically that, you know, security and intelligence has been almost an organic process. I mentioned earlier, CSIS was spun off from the RCMP after the RCMP was involved in some shenanigans going way back from the Macdonald Commission, and it was given its own statutory footing, and CSE was given its statutory footing. Things evolved, and we think that this is an organic process in the security and intelligence field, so we tried to capture that as well.
Well, thank you. I have quite a lot of questions, but I probably won't have time to get through most of them. But, do we have an appropriate number of intelligence agencies? Too many, too few? And before you answer that, on Table 1 on page 20 lists the 17 organizations. And I think there might be one missing. From our work at Procedure and House Affairs, we learned that Parliamentary Protective Service has its own intelligence unit. Would that fall under your mandate as a parliamentarian or as a government committee? How would you see that?
Any federal actor involved in national security and intelligence falls under the mandate of the NSICOP. We did not turn our minds to the sufficiency or insufficiency or perhaps over-sufficiency of the number of actors in the field, so I can't comment on that.
If I still have a few seconds, and you mentioned plain... Is that? Okay. You mentioned the plain English, which I think is an important point. Now, there's a whole page on page 94 describing the arguments by DND against legislative supervision. Could you boil that down to plain English for us and how that debate went?
Maneuverability, operational maneuverability. We wanted to capture in the report verbatim the submission made by DND for that very reason. We wanted Canadians to juxtapose what we think are the merits of proceeding or considering to proceed this way with a legislative basis and some of the challenges coming forth from our frontline practitioners in the Department of National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces. So we reflected that very accurately. In a sense, we wanted to give Canadians a shot of the state of the debate in this area.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Mr. Motts, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. McGinty and Ms. Morrow, for being here today. Before I begin with my questions, I just want to commend you and thank you for your dedication of this report to our colleague, Gord Brown, and who passed away just about a year ago, and I know his family is really appreciative of that gesture, so thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
And I also appreciate the comments you made about the necessity to have national security issues, because really they need to be a nonpartisan issue, and I couldn't agree with you more, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned. Unfortunately, the 2018 terrorism report produced by the Minister of Public Safety appears to have now become mired in some partisan politics. And so, would that report have come to NISACOP before it was published?
Which one? Do
So
you want to take a
Yeah.
shot at that? No, I'll come
that's
back to it.
are you referring to the 2017 or the 2018?
The 2018
Yeah.
threat.
So we were given a
terrorist threat.
copy of the final report, I think, a day or two in advance of its publication.
So you were
as
not-
a courtesy.
Okay, so you were not involved in reviewing.
No,
Okay.
no.
So does your committee intend then, Mr. McGinty, to evaluate the development or publication or revisions of this report to determine if there was any political interference in its various iterations and what best practices should be moving forward? Or does that not fall within your mandate?
It might, but it's not something I'm in a position to comment on now. We have a full spectrum of 4 reviews for 2019, and we generally only pronounce on what we're working on once we announce what we're working on.
Okay, fair enough. So, in the original terrorism threat report, the Minister of Public Safety named Khalistani extremism as a threat. The minister has since reworded it, but the evidence remains very dated in the report. So the only explanation that I can think of are that the new information either can't be published or that it was political. It was a political issue, not a security one. And if it's the latter, if it was political and not security, then it's a significant breach of trust, in my opinion, to use terrorism threats for a political purpose. So where should these questions be investigated? Is this committee the right one? Is your committee the right one? How do we get to the bottom of that issue, sir?
We haven't turned our minds to this question at all. We're not in a position at all to comment on the government's decision one way or the other. I think that's a question better put to the government itself and the minister.
Okay, now, are your members of the committee prevented from speaking out on any errors on reports like this?
As a general rule, the membership has agreed from the very beginning that we are extremely circumspect in any public comments, and generally we only comment on the merits of the work that we've done in the form of reports.
The work you've done.
The work that our committee has done, correct?
Right,
Yes, that's
okay.
correct. Yeah.
So,
And those reports, of course, are unanimous.
okay, very good. So I just want to ask a more general question about the committee and how you operate now. During Bill C-22, which is the legislation that was really to create your committee, former CSIS director and national security advisor Richard Fadden said that the committee should go slow and see how the committee does. Now, having, 16, 18 months of operations under your belt, are there aspects that you think this committee should consider changing in its operations, in its role or in its access? I know Mr. Dubé and you had just talked about the timeliness of being its release once you give it to the PMO. Is there anything else you can think of, or those changes would be legislative or internal? There must be touch points now that you say, okay, we got some stuff we got to work on.
I think one of the areas that we're learning a lot is this question of redaction and the redaction process. And we have turned our minds to this. We reserve the right, so to speak, to perhaps say more about this in due course. We're comparing and contrasting with other redaction processes. Australia was raised, for example, the United States, other countries, to see what the practice is. And that we also think the redaction process may be capable of evolving. But we always tend, as best we can, to providing more information rather than less to the Canadian public.
No, that's not 5 minutes, is it?
Do you want to add something to that?
Okay. So if I'm hearing you correctly, then this committee should maybe have its own redaction rules, and because it's nonpartisan and represents the entire government, I mean the whole House, then maybe no outside redaction should occur, if I've heard you correctly?
Not exactly. What we're trying to get our heads around collectively as a committee of parliamentarians is how the redaction process works, how the departments fit into this, what role does the National Security Advisor play, what role does the Department of Justice play under the Canada Evidence Act, and so on and so forth. I think that it's capable of evolving and becoming more transparent over time.
Thank you, Mr. Motz.
Thank you, Mr. Motz.
Ms. de Bruzen, 5 minutes.
So over the past few exchanges, we've heard a little bit about C59 and what the other forms of oversight or review might be that are put into place. And one of the things I was wondering is, I have to look it up because I always forget the proper name for it, the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency, NSIRA. How would you see the complementarity between your two committees, or the review agency and yourself?
I think it's fair to say that NSIRA's mandate will be one that is chiefly based on examining the activities of different security and intelligence actors on the basis of their lawfulness, within whether they're operating within the powers that they have invested in them. They've also got some mandatory yearly reviews to perform. They'll be, of course, becoming, as they say, a bit of a super CERC. Mm-hmm. So they'll have to review CERC and have to review the communication security establishment on an annual basis. Public complaints as well will be a big factor in terms of receiving Canadians' complaints. That will be very large. We expect it in NSICOP, but we wait and see. But we've already met with the folks at CERC and other agencies that are in place, and we fully intend to meet up with NSIRA when that is created, and we will be, I'm sure, cooperating and sharing information, research, analysis. And one of the benefits of having a secretariat led by Ms. Marcoux is, for example, the institutional memory remains constant, and it transcends any one government or any one membership of the committee.
And do you think that having that kind of a super CERC agency is going to create maybe another base of information, perhaps, to be able to help you do your work, or is it just?
We think so. It's certainly going to be in a position to have access to key information and classified materials. So I fully expect we'll be sharing and cooperating as best we can.
Thank you. When I was looking at your report, in the part where at paragraph 69, you talk about the threat of espionage and foreign influence that's growing in Canada. And then at the end, the last sentence refers to Australian legislation. And it says the committee agrees and notes that Australia passed legislation in June 2018 to better prevent, investigate, and disrupt foreign interference. I was wondering if you'd be able to tell me a little bit about that legislation and what is it that you think we could learn from it?
Well, not very much at this stage, because we're actually in the throes of reviewing the government's response to foreign interference as one of our major reviews for 2019. So following this 2018 report, we want to shed light on the breadth and the scope of the threat of foreign interference. We also want to assess the government's response to that threat. And we want to do it particularly with respect to Canadian institutions and different ethnocultural communities in a Canadian context. Not so much electoral integrity or, for example, the acquisition of Canadian companies under the Investment Canada Act. Those are not areas, or cybersecurity, those are not the areas that we're honing in. We're going to be looking at the question of who are these foreign actors and what are they up to and how well are we responding.
Is there anything that you'd be able to comment upon, though, about the Australian legislation? What because it's referenced in this paragraph, so just, is there something you could tell us about the Australian example?
Ready?
I don't have the details of the legislation in front of me, but I remember the discussion at committee in the sense that it was struck by the fact that Australia had enacted explicit legislation on foreign interference, whereas here foreign interference is listed as a threat to national security under the CSIS Act. But Australia felt that the threat was severe enough to draft and enact explicit legislation on it.
Okay, no, thank
so
you.
Probably a whole of government approach as opposed to one single agency.
All right, and that's something that we'll be able to, you're working on that right now, so that's something that hopefully we'll get
I'll have more to say. Talk
to you about a little bit more. The last minute, I only have a minute, but you've talked a bit about the lack of awareness among Canadians about our security agencies. When you looked into it, what did you find was the biggest misunderstanding, if there was a biggest misunderstanding? There was one part you note in the report about lack of knowledge about what our agencies are, but was there anything where you spotted actually a misunderstanding as to how our agencies work?
It was more basic than that. Very few Canadians could name our core intelligence agencies. Very few knew what CSE was. Very few really understood what CSIS was, what it was doing, how it was operating. So it's an even more rudimentary lack of understanding. Not so much, imprecision about the way they act, just simply the very existence of the organizations or the number of organizations that are acting. This is very new for Canadians.
Thank
We have the chart of all the organizations in here, so that might help get that information.
We hope
out.
so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeBruzen. Mr. Glinsky, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'd like to thank both presenters today, and thank you for the work that you're doing for our country. It's a lot of long hours, and I appreciate what you're doing. But I've noticed in your report, especially kind of paragraph 67, 68, and even partially going into 69, where I think in 68, you mentioned CSIS has raised concern about Chinese influence in Canadian elections and stuff like that. And have you looked more as your agency involved in any of the preparations for the 2019 elections to ensure no political interference from foreign agents? Or could it potentially be retroactively look at this issue? Are you going to look at it before? Has there been any studies done?
Well, not at this time, not by NSICOP. Our foreign interference focus, as I mentioned, is looking. First objective is just to simply shed light on the breadth and the scope of the threat by foreign. And who are these primary threat actors? What threat are they posing? What are they doing? And then how well is our country, secondly, responding to the threat? So we're not focusing so much on electoral integrity in this election forthcoming as we are the general role of outside actors.
If your organization itself is not, do you know if the other groups like CSIS, are they doing some active research or study or intelligence work into that area?
One of the reasons we didn't look at the upcoming elections in terms of foreign interference is because the government, and they informed us, but also because they were doing so much work in terms of preventing or assessing the threat and then taking action to prevent the threat from of foreign interference.
Thank you. Since I do have very limited time, being a new organization and you're working with our basically 8 major intelligence gathering organizations in Canada, how have you found over the last year the cooperation with these outside agencies? Quite often, these agencies are reluctant to give information, reluctant to trust a new organization or outside. I was wondering, has the transition been fairly good? Are they buying into the need of our national organization?
That's a great question, and generally, yes. I think most folks we work with are they're very supportive. But it's new. We're building trust and building a relationship of cooperation and getting access to information and pushing and poking and prodding from time to time to get what we need. And I mentioned earlier the Department of National Defense has never had a spotlight shown on it this way in terms of its intelligence activities. That was a great learning experience and a lot of trust. This year we're doing a major review on the Canada Border Services Agency, which has never been reviewed by an outside body of parliamentarians. So we've already received roughly 16,000 pages of documentation from CBSA, so the cooperation is very, very good so far. And I think that most folks think that this kind of external review is helpful in terms of how they conduct their affairs, and look forward to the findings of NSICOP because they are nonpartisan, because they are very much recommendations for improvement.
Okay, thank you. And just expanding on, I think we have a little bit of time. How are you finding your group being recognized by international communities?
Well, we're very proud of the report. The annual report has been well received around the world. We've had commentary from the UK, from the United States, from Australia, New Zealand. For example, we heard from New Zealand, I believe the Intelligence Commissioner, I think she's called, Inspector General, who has said that Chapter 4 on national defense is going to be part of the intelligence priorities will be part of the foundational examination of in the Christchurch shooting commission of inquiry. So we're reaching out as best we can, but the feedback so far is very positive.
Okay, my last quick question is, we gave you a mandate when the group was started, and there was lots of controversy over it initially. Have we given you enough tools? And I believe there was supposed to be a 5-year review.
Right.
Do you see and find, even in your first year, that we maybe need to look at that quicker? And are you going to need better tools to assist your organization?
We might, but right now I think we're only 2 years or so into the 5-year mandate, and I think it's going to be interrupted a little bit with an election campaign in the fall. And I think 5 years is I think the committee would say 5 years is an appropriate moment, but we're certainly carrying forward some of these areas as we practice and get more experience. I think we'll have more to say and perhaps more suggestions for improvement.
Thank you, Mr. Miglinski. Mr. Graham, 5 minutes, please.
On page 66 of the report, paragraph 170 describes signals intelligence. There's a description of the different types of intelligence. And signals intelligence, of course, is the one that gets the most interest. It's the one that all the Edward Snowden stories were really about at the core. So by the very nature of SIGINT, it captures everything. It's really hard not to. So in your view, and this comes down to the core reason the committee was created from political reasons, does Canada's intelligence apparatus and our Five Eyes partners especially take adequate safeguards to prevent unjustified or illegal collection of data by, about, or between Canadians?
That's an excellent question and a really difficult question. I'm going to deflect it to a certain extent by letting you know that again this year in 2019, one of the major reviews we're undertaking is a special review of the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. We're going to be examining the collection, the use, the retention and dissemination of information on Canadian citizens by the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. We're going to try to make sure there's clarity on the legal and the policy constraints around this collection of information on Canadian citizens when conducting defence intelligence activities. So it's something we're immediately seized with.
So does DND have domestic intelligence, or is it mostly international?
So they're able to collect intelligence if they have a legally mandated authority to, I guess, deploy forces on a mission, whether it's in Canada in support of a legal RCMP or CSC, for example, or abroad if they're on a mission abroad. So they can collect in support of a mission, wherever that is.
Okay. Has the existence of NSI COP changed the behavior of any of the intelligence community? Do we know?
Well, I think yes. I mentioned earlier one of the immediate effects of examining intelligence activities at the Department of National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces was the department set up for the first time ever a unit within it to respond to outside review, to pull together information and to collate and to respond to the requests. We've made many requests into the department and received thousands and thousands of pages. And when we think it's not satisfactory, we go back and ask for more. If something is missing, we ask why things might be missing. So we think that the probity that an NSICOP can bring to organizations that are involved in national security intelligence is a really positive thing for Canadians.
Okay. At the very end of your report, and paragraph 265, I read a sort of a hint of frustration that the intelligence community is less than forthcoming and has to be coaxed along to provide information you're asking for some of the time. Is this changing, and will the recommendations you propose also help solve that?
Do you say paragraph 265?
265 on page 110. It's right towards the end of the report. The wording, I felt a bit of frustration by the committee that you'd ask a question, you'd get a very narrow response instead of getting the answers that you're looking for.
Well, maybe I think Ms. Marcoux is best placed to answer that question because she is on a regular basis dealing with her colleagues inside these departments and agencies.
So as I think I mentioned earlier, it's a question of the departments, particularly those who are not subject to regular review, for them to get used to, I guess, providing information and providing the relevant information to the committee. So, and in some cases, it's perhaps the Secretariat needing to be more precise in terms of the timeframes, the type of information we want. So it's a back and forth process that's ongoing quite a lot. But in some cases, it's just a question of the need to read the document carefully. And if there's a reference, for example, to a document that's in a footnote, it should be incumbent on them, for example, to give that document as well to us. So it's can be the small things, it can be the big things as well.
Understood. On paragraph 107 on page 41, you don't need to go to each page, just telling you where they are. The paragraph discusses the case of CSIS drafting a ministerial direction minus 2 priorities and it creating a bunch of confusion. And about whether or not intelligence can be collected. So my question is, are they allowed to collect things outside of the priority list? Because why would it create confusion? And they can still do data collection, right? Even if it's not in the 10 items that are redacted on the.
Can you just,
Yeah, sure.
it's easier for me to,
Paragraph 107
okay.
on page 41, 42. This is excellent weekend reading, by the way.
I don't think we're in a position to give you much more insight given the classified information that backs up that paragraph.
Understood.
Yeah, I think it's because CSIS operates within a very precise, I guess, reference and direction. And so the more precision they get, the better it is for the officers in a region to collect. And I think that's what we were trying to refer to.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Graham. Mr. Dubé, 3 minutes.
Oui, merci. Il me restait juste deux.
Thank you so much. I have two final questions. One might seem a little foolish, but I think it's important to ask. Would the report be easier to use on, will it be easier the next time to open on computer? Yes, that's the problem with the redacting. We can't simply pull out the information and then put it back, the document back on the web, the internet. We have to make photocopies and then put it back on the website. So that makes it a little bit more difficult to access. Well, I hope that by 2019, pardon me, but I hope that you'll allow me to express my frustration. Yes, we're frustrated with this as well. Thank you so much. One last point here. Is there a plan for an official follow-up on the implementation of the recommendations? I asked something like that in a longer-winded question earlier, but I just want to make sure that there's some sort of official follow-up on your recommendations. Yes, there is a plan that we have in the committee to ensure some follow-up. We are very happy to be here today, for example, before you, and we hope to be heard by your counterparts in the Senate. We think this is a good beginning to at least allow parliamentarians to understand what we're up to. Thank you.
Question. In your recommendations, you talk about the process for setting intelligence priorities, which is the F1 recommendations, and you're complimentary about that. And then by F7, your performance measurement for the security intelligence is not robust enough. Intelligence priorities change all the time, and the one that comes to mind is the change in priorities between terrorism and cybersecurity. A lot of intelligence analysts think that cybersecurity is a far greater threat than is terrorism. Can you describe that process, and can you describe it in terms of whether you're satisfied that we ultimately have our priorities correct?
When we undertook the intelligence priority setting review, we did it because we wanted to be, so to speak, at the top of the crow's nest for the country, examining the overall architecture of security and intelligence, while at the same time getting into the engine room to see how these priorities were in fact arrived at. One of the stumbling blocks we think that we have happened upon here that's made very plain in the recommendation is this question of standing intelligence requirements. There are over 400. It's very difficult to triage and to feed in 400 plus standing intelligence requirements into a cabinet process. We don't have access to cabinet confidences in this regard, but we've seen most of the material that's led up to those kinds of discussions and debate. We think there's real improvement to be made, which is why we're calling on the National Security and Intelligence Advisor to take a much more proactive role. The NSIA is pivotal in the overall architecture of security and intelligence in Canada. And she is best placed, we believe, to streamline and to simplify. A lot of good frontline actors in security and intelligence in the country are looking for more clarity, and are looking for perhaps a smoother process. So the entire chapter breaks down for Canadians how this works step by step, and we've honed in on a couple of internal fine-tuning mechanisms that we think will go a certain distance in improving the entire process.
Okay, thank you for that. And on behalf of the committee, I want to thank both of you for your presentation. It's an insight that I think all of us appreciate, and I commend the work of your committee. I commend your report, and again, thank you for the I know, very hard work that you put in over the last 18 months. So with that, colleagues, I propose to suspend until we see Minister Goodale in the room. But I'm going to turn to Mr. Paulus while we've got a little bit of time. He wishes to deal with M167. I would only, which is not on the agenda. I only want to deal with that if, in fact, there's unanimity on the part of colleagues to deal with it now. If not, I'm just going to shut it down and deal with it.
You have to go on camera for that, though, right?
Well, yes, exactly, we do. Well, in which case,
We can't wait for Ralph then.
well, first of all, is there an attitude that we wish to do this at the end of Minister Goodale's presentation? Can I just? That's fine. So you'll be fine if I then go in camera. Is that right? So I want to just make sure we're all okay. Okay. With that, we're suspended. Mr. Goodale, you're. Resumed. Minister and his colleagues are with us. This is a special meeting where we agreed to invite the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness to appear to and respond to and take questions on the 2018 Public Report on Terrorism Threat to Canada. So I'll open it now and ask Reverend Minister Goodale for his opening statement and ask him to introduce his colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Good to be back. I have with me today the Associate Deputy Minister, Vincent Rigby, the Commissioner of the RCMP, Brenda Lucky, and the Director of CSIS, David Vigneault. And we're happy to try to respond to your questions about the public report on the terrorism threat to Canada. I'd like to begin by saying that the women and men who work for our intelligence and security agencies do an incredible and very difficult job, identifying, monitoring, mitigating, and stopping threats to the interests of keeping Canadians safe. It is a 24/7 unrelenting job, and the people who protect us deserve our admiration and our thanks. The purpose of the public report on the terrorism threat to Canada is to provide Canadians with unclassified information about the threats that we are facing, and that includes threats emanating from Canada, but targeted elsewhere around the world. No country wants to be an exporter of terrorism or violent extremism. Providing Canadians with a public assessment of terrorist threats is a core element of the government's commitment to transparency and accountability. While never exposing classified information, the goal is to be informative and accurate. Before I get into the specifics of this year's report, I would like to remind committee members about the 2016 public report on the terrorist threat to Canada. In the ministerial foreword to that report, I wrote this, quote, "It is a serious and unfortunate reality that terrorist groups, most notably the so-called Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, use violent extremist propaganda to encourage individuals to support their cause. This group is neither Islamic nor a state, and so it will be referred to as Daesh, its Arabic acronym in this report." End of quote. In hindsight, that principle is something that should have better guided the authors of subsequent reports when referring to the various terrorist threats facing our country. Canadians of all faiths and backgrounds have helped to build our country and continue to be integral members of our communities and neighborhoods. They contribute to inspiring a stronger, more equal and compassionate Canada that we all strive for. It is neither accurate nor fair to equate any one community or an entire religion to extremist violence or terror. To do so is simply wrong and inaccurate. Following the issuance of the 2018 report, we heard several strong objections, particularly from the Sikh and Muslim communities in Canada, that the language in the report was not sufficiently precise. That by using terms such as Sikh extremism or Sunni extremism, the report was perceived to impugn entire religions, instead of properly zeroing in on the dangerous actions of a small number of people. I can assure you that broad brush was not the intent of the report. It used language that has actually been in use for years, appearing in places such as the previous government's 2012 counterterrorism strategy and the report in December of 2018 of the All-Party National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. Similar language also appeared on the order paper of the House of Commons in reference to certain proposed parliamentary business. But as I have said before, language matters. And just because something has often been phrased in a certain way does not mean that it should be phrased in that way now or in the future. As a result of the concerns that were presented to me, I requested a review of the language in the report in order to ensure that the public is provided with useful, unclassified information about terrorist threats to Canada without falsely maligning any particular community. We consulted with the Sikh and Muslim communities in Canada. We consulted with the Cross-Cultural Roundtable on National Security. We consulted with our security and intelligence agencies, as well as hearing from many members of Parliament. Going forward, we will use terminology that focuses on intent or ideology rather than an entire religion. As an example, the report now refers to, quote, extremists who support violent means to establish an independent state within India, end of quote. This is an approach, interestingly enough, that is sometimes used by some of our allies. For instance, the 2018 National Strategy for Counterterrorism of the United States of America reads in part as follows, quote, Babar Khalsa International seeks through violent means to establish an independent state in India, end of quote. The objective must be to describe the threat to the public accurately and precisely without unintentionally condemning the entire Sikh community or any other community. The vast, vast majority of the Sikh community in Canada are peaceful and would never wish to harm anyone, not in this country or anywhere else. Similarly, we have eliminated the use of terms such as Shia or Sunni extremism. Going forward, these threats will be described in a more precise manner, such as by referring directly to terrorist organizations such as Hezbollah or Daesh, and that is more accurate and more informative. Once again, the point is that language matters, and we must always be mindful of that fact, which is why the review will be an ongoing process. I'm sure that every member here has seen the increasing statistics on hate crime published just a couple of weeks ago. 2017, sadly, saw a 47% increase in police-reported hate crime in Canada. Social media platforms are making it easier and easier for hateful individuals to find each other and then to amplify their toxic rhetoric. And tragically, as we saw very recently in New Zealand, this sometimes leads to devastating and deadly consequences. The idea that governments of any stripe might inadvertently continue to use language that can then be twisted by these nefarious and violent individuals as proof points in their minds and justifications for their hatred should be anathema to all of us. In addition to the language review, I would like to share some of the innovative things that our security agencies are doing to be accurate, effective, and bias-free in their day-to-day work. As just one example, for the past several months, the people who are tasked with making those final difficult decisions about adding someone to the SATA, the Secure Air Travel Act, or the no-fly list, in other words, they have, on that list, they have had the name and the picture of that particular person removed from the file so that the name or the picture does not influence the final decision, not even subconsciously. The focus of the decision makers must be on the facts that are in the file and make a decision on the basis of those facts. So it's a matter of fact and not prejudice. The women and men of our intelligence and security community are hardworking professionals, but there is not a human being alive who is not prone to some preconceived idea or bias. Government should try very hard to mitigate the effects of this very human trait. Finally, while the updated report has been received reasonably well, there have been critics who have complained that the changes reduce the ability of our agencies to do their job. I would profoundly disagree with that, Mr. Chair. The factual content of the report has not changed. It continues to outline the threats facing and emanating from Canada. It simply does it in a manner that cannot be interpreted to denigrate entire communities or religions because of the actions of a small number of individuals who are actually behaving in a manner that is contrary to what that community holds dear. The whole community should not be condemned for that. And frankly, our security and intelligence agencies need the goodwill and the support of all peaceful, law-abiding members of all communities in order to do their jobs effectively. We cannot build those partnerships if the language we use creates division or distance or unease between those communities and our security agencies. Mr. Chair, thank you for inviting me to be here again today, and I would be pleased with my officials to try to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Minister Goodale. Ms. Soda, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And right on off the offset, I'd like to say thank you for appearing here today. Thank you for the work that you do. And we know that the RCMP, CSIS, your job is not easy, and you keep our country safe. So it is much appreciated. However, I have raised this issue with Minister Goodale several times. My community and several stakeholders contacted me after this report was made public back in December, and they were truly bewildered as to why Sikhs had been identified in this way, why other faiths, Sunni, Shia, Islamists, had been mentioned in this report, because previously in these public reports, they've always focused on regions and extremist travelers. So why the change in the way this report was set up this time?
Ms. Hoda, the report is the collective work of a variety of security agencies, security and intelligence agencies within the Government of Canada, and they do, as you have acknowledged, a very difficult, a very professional job of assessing the risks that are before the country at any given moment in time. That changes from time to time. Since it's a report to the government and to the public, it's perhaps not for me to comment on the input that went into it, but perhaps David, from CSIS's point of view, can you provide a perspective on the factors that would come into the thinking of the authors of the report in terms of what needs to be assembled at any given moment in time?
If I may just add a little bit more to that, because in your introductory remarks, Minister, you had mentioned that in the 2016 report, you had specifically mentioned that ISIL would no longer be used, and because they were nor Islamic nor a state, and Daesh would be used. So why the reversal of that too in this report? There's a lot of changes that we've seen in the layout, the substance, and the description in this report.
Mr. Rigby, the Associate Deputy Minister wants to start.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Minister. So this is a whole of security and intelligence community products. So public safety has the technical lead, but we reach out to the community and in a very inclusive way take input from across RCMP, from CSIS, from ITAC. We assemble the information both in terms of the threat, both in terms of threat capabilities, also in terms of the government response. And then we pull all of that material together, and then we all collectively agree at the end of the day, right up to head of agency, before it goes to the government and goes to the minister for sign-off. There had been, I think, a little bit of criticism in the last couple of years that the reports had not been as detailed as people would like, and they'd like it to be a little bit more expansive and to go into a little bit more of the intricacies of the threat, et cetera. And I think in our attempt perhaps to provide a little bit more of that detail, unfortunately some language crept into the report that at the end of the day we're now here to discuss. Mm-hmm. And as the Minister has said, language that in future we would much prefer, where we will focus more on ideology and less on community. So that's a little bit of the background as to how this slipped in. Again, the language had been used in previous reports, but not in terms of some of the specific terminology that the Minister referred to had not been used since 2012.
Okay. And as mentioned, and I know that there has been some criticism that about removing these words, saying that it will not be precise, but I, like the Minister, disagree, because I think zoning in on the actual terrorist organizations is being far more precise. But can you explain to me then, in the section on those that continue to support by violent means to establish an independent state within India, this section, how is it precise? The questions that I get from stakeholders in the community is that this section or reference to this section has not previously been in past reports, other than the mention of one organization in the past. So why now? Why, when no events have occurred publicly that we know of, why was it included in the 2018 report and never really referenced before, when in that section it mainly references to an incident and a time between 1982 and 93?
Mr. Vigneault, I think, can comment on this. I just make two preliminary observations. The material that is prepared and published in the public threat report, of course, has to be unclassified. Mm-hmm. And classified information has to remain classified, but there is there is a parliamentary avenue for some examination of that. And of course, that's the purview of your previous witness this afternoon.
I was thinking that myself.
The National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians was created for the purpose of allowing our security agencies, when appropriate, to be able to discuss classified information with the appropriate group of parliamentarians. That is the NACICOP, as opposed to a standard parliamentary committee. And if the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians wishes to pursue an issue of this kind, that would be the appropriate venue for that discussion to happen. But if I could invite David Vigneault, the director of CSIS, to comment further.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your question and to give me an opportunity to elaborate on this topic. As you can imagine, CSIS, national security investigation, are very fluid. They're influenced by events taking place here in Canada, taking place abroad. And our mandate is to make sure that individuals here in Canada who are supporting or engaged somehow in the support of the use of violence for political purposes are investigated. And so these fluid investigations, ebb and flow, and we have been providing advice to the government. We have been providing advice to public safety in the context of the report and our threat assessment. And we remain, we stand behind the assessment we've provided, that they are a small group of individuals who are right now engaging in activities that are pursuing use of violent means to establish an independent state in India. And so it is our responsibility to make sure that we investigate these threats and that we are providing the advice and to our CMP, to our other colleagues, and to make sure that, based on our own information, our own investigations done by CSIS, that we are making sure that, we are not, Canada is not being used to plot a terrorist activity, and that, we Canadians are also safe at the same time.
We're going to have to leave it there, Ms. Soda. Mr. Paulus, 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Goodale, I have had the luck of getting the first copy of the report of the 11th of December 2018 that gave us a good deal of information. I understand your argument and your explanation. What you're offering us here today to restitch, what we perhaps shouldn't have gotten here, but I'm personally happy that we got this information about national security, and now you're using this in a partisan fashion. So what concerns me here is that as Canadians, we receive information, we learn what the RCMP and CSIS have done, the work they've done, and this gets into a report, important information about safety and security in Canada, and then you have some groups that start some pressure tactics. So you hear a first group, and then you have a version 2 that goes online, and then another pressure group talks to you, you change the report once again, and you've got another version online. Of course, this is of relevance to specific communities, but the process itself, when you have reports that have been drawn up by our security bodies that communicate information, well, that's what it is. So to what extent should politics enter into play just to avoid insulting anyone?
The representations that we received, as I mentioned in my remarks, came from representatives of the Muslim community and the Sikh community in particular. But we also heard from a number of members of Parliament from different political parties, not just one. In fact, all sides of the House of Commons had occasion to comment on this situation and made their views known, raising similar kinds of concerns. So in assessing the input that was coming in, it was contrary to the assertion in your question. It was not a partisan issue. It was a matter of accuracy and fairness and being effective.
But I do think that the information was accurate. The information that was in the first version of the report, it was pretty clear about threats, existing threats. And now you changed it just to, lighten, change some works, basically playing politics here, making sure you don't displease anyone.
Yeah, the purpose of the changes. Clearly, from what we heard from a number of stakeholders across the country and the cross-cultural roundtable, and from members of parliament of several different political parties, was that when you read the words in the report, they conveyed the impression that an entire religion or an entire community was a threat to national security. That is factually incorrect. There are certain individuals that are threats to national security and that need properly to be investigated. But when you report on that matter publicly, using expressions that leave the impression with people that it's an entire religion or an entire ethnocultural community that's to be feared here, that is factually incorrect, and that is what needed to be corrected.
Mais pourtant.
And yet, everyone understands that we're speaking of extremists. It's not everyone who's involved, no matter what the community or religion. When we speak of radical Islam, we're saying clearly that it's radical Islam. So we're identifying the radicals who've radicalized themselves or radicalizing others. Obviously, we're not speaking about all Muslims. So is there a way to be clear without attacking those who aren't involved? I think that's important, of course, the choice of words. But avoiding reducing the level of information and not going about it just to avoid insulting anyone.
Here, Mr. Paulus, is to do exactly what you have said, to convey the threats in a public way, in an accurate way, but not using a brush that is so broad that you condemn an entire religion or you condemn an entire ethnocultural community. And while you have seen phrases in the report that to you were clear in narrowing the scope of what was being referred to, there were others who read that report and saw it exactly through the opposite end of the telescope, to see that the language used was broadening the brush beyond what the threat really was. And the objective of the review, of the consultation, of the work that we have done here is to be accurate and precise in telling Canadians what the threat is, but also to be fair in the sense that you are not condemning, impugning, or maligning entire religions or entire ethnic communities.
À votre connaissance, est-ce que c'est la première?
To your knowledge, is this the first time that interest groups have led to a report being changed? Has this happened in your government or other governments, that after a report is published and communicated officially, that groups actually have it changed?
In sort of in the areas over which I have jurisdiction and responsibility, this is the first change of this nature. I would say that the reaction was sufficiently large and pointed to lead me to the conclusion that the problem that was being raised was a serious problem. It wasn't just a little semantic argument. It was a very serious concern that impressions were being left by the report that were not fair and were not accurate, and the language needed to be modified. When we looked at the language, we found that very similar phrases have been used in many other places at different times, including in reports that had been filed by the previous government, in reports that had been filed by the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. Indeed, some of the language also appeared at one point in time on the order paper of the House of Commons. So the language had been in use, but just because it had been in use for a certain period of time or for certain purposes does not mean that you need to continue using a phrase that is running the risk of conveying misinformation and a misimpression of entire communities or entire religions.
Thank you, Mr. Paulus. And it would be helpful, Minister, if you, from time to time, looked at the chair so that colleagues can get their questions in. I know you wouldn't want to.
You are indeed a very attractive specimen, sir. But
yes.
I'm admiring this entire committee.
I thought you'd admire my tie. I thought that was Mr. Dubé, 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Minister.
Thank you, Chair.
I want to thank my colleagues on the committee for accepting my motion to have you come and speak to this issue. As you know, I wrote to you in December when this issue first arose, and Mr. Singh and I have both written to the Prime Minister before the changes were made. And unlike what was just being mentioned, the words do matter, and on that we agree, Minister. And I think the Sikh community deserves praise for standing up for itself, because ultimately the consequences are very real. There is a rise in hate crimes, and there is another form of terrorism that is happening in communities, not just here in Canada, but around the world, and that is going after and attacking faith communities, and so and other communities, of course. So I think these changes are welcome, and certainly, hopefully, the work will continue with affected communities, because there is a specific issue that was raised in this report, but we know that the Muslim community, both here in Canada and around the world, and certainly in the United States as well, has faced this issue certainly with regards to terrorism for the better part of 2 decades. And it's been a concern that's been raised. It's one of the reasons why you've had to make changes to the no-fly list, because there is a form of profiling inherent in the way that apparatus works. So my question on that end, Minister, is you've said a lot of the things that I think are welcome, certainly, by folks hoping for change, but in how this is done. And we've asked that this process be rethought, that there be a rethink, given that we are seeing a rise in hate crimes and other incidents that jeopardize seriously public safety. So will there be a push to institutionalize this thinking that you've laid forward here today, when these types of mechanisms, transparency-wise, are very important, but that can have the opposite effect as you've pointed out?
We intend to use language throughout our systems, Mr. Dubé, that is accurate, precise, and fair in conveying information about terrorist threats, and it has to be an ongoing process. It's not something that you can just sort of do once as a kind of blip and presume that you've addressed the issue or you've solved the problem. People need to be alert to the issue all the time, partly for the reason that you mentioned, that if you're not alert to the issue, you can inadvertently be encouraging those who would be inclined to hate crimes and using the language as a pretext for what they do. The other reason why it's important, Mr. Dubé, is that if we're going to have a safe, respectful, inclusive society, there has to be a good rapport between our police and security agencies and every community in our society.
This is probably
and if language is used that is seen to be divisive, then you won't have that rapport, and we'll have a less safe society.
Probably not the greatest point to interrupt you on, but my time is limited. I did want to get to the substantive piece though, because and older reports are quite challenging to find in this digital age. To be fair, I think that's worth pointing out. But from what we see, it's been 17 years since the issue that was raised in this report was ever part of a similar report. So it's been quite a while, and I think one of the issues that was raised by many who were taking issue with this is not just the language that's used, which we've all addressed today, but is also the why. And I think there's a question that was raised to that effect, which is to say, is there not a concern that when given that you can't divulge everything because it's classified information, that some things, if you can't explain why, that as much as we always want transparency, that some thought needs to be put as whether it's better to leave it classified instead of sort of going halfway there without being able to provide any justification, which was also a big issue that was taken by some of the communities that were calling the government to account on this. Because the question of why is important to raise, because there's reporting this morning even about the Minister of Foreign Affairs getting talking points relating to specific communities on foreign trips. So there is some cynicism around that, and you're not concerned that it gets fed into by sort of dropping something into a report and then not being able to back it up.
Well, there are two imperatives, Mr. Dubé, and they sometimes present a bit of a conflict. On the one side, our security agencies would want to be as forthcoming as they can possibly be with Canadians in a public report to provide information that would be useful and helpful to Canadians in understanding the various public threats. At the same time, you raise the other competing issue, which is the extent to which you can actually discuss the details.
Right.
And the experience will undoubtedly be borne in mind when future reports are written.
With the last minute I have, I just want to ask you, just the fact that the consequences were perhaps not properly thought out, is that a sign of a larger issue that seems to be coming more and more to the forefront, which is to say that the threat posed by another form of extremism, namely white nationalism and white supremacy, is being perhaps understated or undervalued by our security agencies, and perhaps more thought needs to be put onto what's happening there and the consequences that it has?
The police and security agencies have to deal with all of it, Mr. Dubé, and they are alert to all of those threats and potential risks. And you will note in this report there are frequent references to far right-wing extremism that poses a threat as well, and it is very much a part of the matrix of issues that the police and security agencies are alert to and are dealing with.
Thank you, Mr. Dubé. Ms. DeBruzen.
Thank you, Minister. And in fact, I'll be picking up a little bit from where Mr. Dubé just left off, and it's the sections in this report about right-wing extremism. I'm from Montreal. I was a CEGEP student at the time of Polytechnique, which was an impactful event as far as it was clearly geared by, it was targeting women because of a hatred of women. And only about a month ago, I was at a vigil for the van attack on Yonge Street, which was another event which, as far as what the reports say, was also, again, based on a hatred of women. At least that's what we've heard from reports. And at the beginning of this year, outside mosque in my community, we held a vigil because of what happened in New Zealand in Christchurch. But in fact, not so long ago, we had also had a vigil because of what had happened in Saint-Fouet, the mosque shooting. And those are three very large events as far as people killed, all of which would be based on right-wing extremism and that kind of a philosophy. And yet, when I'm looking at this report, it says, however, while racism, bigotry, and misogyny may undermine the fabric of Canadian society, ultimately they do not usually result in criminal behavior or threats to national security. And so my question is this type of extremism truly less dangerous than the other forms of extremism? Because that doesn't seem to be at least my experience as to when I look back on our recent history.
Mr. Brusen, I'll invite both the Commissioner of the RCMP and David Vigneault to comment on those issues, because it falls to them to do the investigations and to keep people safe. But I can tell you that over the course of the last several years, when I've had the vantage point of being fairly close to our security agencies and watching their activities and the shaping of their priorities and so forth, they have worked very hard on the issue of right-wing extremism, and the report that is the subject of this meeting, in fact, makes specific reference to a number of incidents that demonstrate why this worry needs to be treated seriously. We've had the instances from outside the country as well, when you see New Zealand or Pittsburgh or Charlottesville and so forth. But within our own country, the van attack on Yonge Street, the mosque attack in Saint Foy, the attack on police officers at Marythorpe and Moncton, the misogynist attacks at Dawson College or École Polytechnique. Those are all the product of the same perverted and evil ideology that results in people being put at risk and people losing their lives. It is taken seriously. And let me ask Brenda and David to comment.
Well, to respond, thank you. It's no less a threat than other topics within this report. But I think when we look at the report, one of the focuses, the goal amongst others, was to provide an overall assessment of the terrorist threats to Canada. But we've added in the right-wing extremism because it is a threat. Maybe not when we talk in your quote, you mentioned to national security. It's more to events and individuals.
Just to clarify, the report actually says ultimately they do not usually result in criminal behavior or threats to national security. And so it seemed to me that when we look at the list of events, in fact, you have a fairly long list of events that seem to be due to right-wing extremism.
There's absolutely criminal activity, and that would be our focus. When we do our focus on criminal activity, it's conducted by groups or individuals in any category within this report or outside, most definitely, and it's no less a threat. David?
So from CISA's perspective, the way we look at this is that any individual or groups who are looking to use violence to achieve political, religious, or ideological objectives is a threat to national security as per the definition in our Act. And I'm on the record in the other chamber recently to having said that we are focusing more of our resources looking at the threat of different extremist groups, misogynist, white nationalist, and so no-nationalist, because essentially they are now using terrorist methods to achieve some of their goals. The attack in Yonge Street was the method was publicized initially by an Al-Qaeda affiliated magazine. They called it the ultimate mowing machine, and they were essentially telling people, this is what you should be doing. So now you had someone who had other extremist views who used a technique that had been developed or popularized by another set of groups to essentially kill people. And so from our perspective, we're not making a difference, and we are investigating these groups when they are meeting these definitions.
I guess my only concern is when I was reading the rest of the report, I didn't see any other form of terrorism or criminal behavior being kind of kept within the context of saying, well, these groups ultimately they do not usually result in criminal behavior or threats to national security. Those kinds of terms weren't couched around other types of groups. And so I was just curious why the differentiation when we're looking at.
I can't speak for all the groups, but essentially, if you look at a funnel, essentially, you have the vast majority of the commentary, vile commentary online, would be, will have an impact on society, but would not be meeting criminal threshold. Then you have a small amount of that may be, of interest to the RCMP or to other police bodies, law enforcement in Canada. And then you have a very, very small group of people, individuals or small groups who are looking to organize themselves, and use violence to achieve some political purpose, and that will be a national security case. So it is if you want, a sort of methodology we're looking at to essentially better understand and better characterize what we're seeing in society. But it is definitely evolving.
Thank you, Mr. Brusen. Mr. Motts, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister and officials for being here today. Just in reference to this, I'd like to, I have some experience in building threat assessments from a criminal organization perspective that fed into a national organized crime threat assessment for this country. So I understand the work and vigor it takes to create this from our security agencies. So with that in mind, Mr. Minister, I'd like to read you a quote from Phil Gursky, a former CSIS analyst and a very respected one, and he said the following with regards to this report. He said, what about individuals or groups, and I quote, what about individuals or groups who are inspired by violent ideologies and terrorist groups such as Daesh or Al-Qaeda, aside from the ridiculous insistence that Daesh, rather than the Islamic State, and in brackets he says, Minister Goodale, Daesh is Arabic for Islamic State, by the way. This phrase is only partially accurate. I know from my days at CSIS that yes, some Canadians are inspired by these terrorist groups. But there is also a huge swath that radicalize to violence in the name of greater Sunni Islamist extremist thought. In brackets, Shia Islamist extremists are a different beast altogether. And a bracket that has little or nothing to do with Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State or any other terrorist group. Oh, and guess what? They're all Muslims. Nary a Buddhist or an animist among them. Again, using the term Sunni Islamist extremism is what we called it when I was at CSIS. That does not mean all Canadian Muslims are terrorists. To my mind, this is just political correctness and electioneering gone mad. End of quote. I think it's important to recognize, and I know you do, sir, that national security issues are far more important for Canadians than to have politics part of that. Now, my question to you is this. So do you think that informing Canadians, informing the public of the actual threats posed by terrorists, irregardless of the moniker, should be beyond any electoral designs of the current government?
Absolutely. Okay. And that's the way I conduct myself.
Okay. So then, how would you then dismiss Mr. Gursky's expertise so easily with regards to the changes that have been made to this report?
Well, I go to the. I don't have his quote in front of me, but I go to the latter part of it that you referred to, where he seemed to be saying, despite some of the language that he referred to, everybody would understand that not all of the Muslim community was being criticized. That's a rough paraphrase of what you said. It's not at all clear, Mr. Motts, that's in fact true. When you use broad brush language, you can, by implication, be impugning innocent people that you do not mean to criticize, but the language gets extrapolated, and if you look at some of the material on the internet, to see the distortions and the misinterpretations and the abuse, it all gets back to the original point. let's be very, very careful about the language used in the first place.
Well,
We have to be accurate about conveying the nature of the risk, but let's not express it in such a way that we impugn people that are innocent, and by impugning them, put them at risk.
Well, we all agree that a threat can be an individual. It can be a small elements within certain communities. But I think Canadians are astute enough to appreciate and understand that it is not the entire community at all that is subject to, the very defining language that would would define, a terrorist threat. And so I guess one of the things that I'm curious about is how many agencies contributed to this report? Like, who were they?
Briefly, Minister.
I'll ask Mr. Rigby to do the calculation of adding up the numbers that were involved.
But along with that question, though, so the agencies obviously that were involved in the creation of this, were they also involved in
you are stretching the chair's patience.
Were they also involved and consulted or consulted
Mr. Motz,
in the revision? That's all I'm getting at.
please, a brief answer.
As I said, we consulted with a whole variety of agencies to get their input. I'll ask Mr. Rigby to talk about the total numbers that are involved in the intelligence community within the Government of Canada. But Mr. Motz, I think when the people who wrote the material were using those expressions that you've just referred to, their intent was to narrow the focus. But when members of the public saw those expressions, they actually saw the situation through the other end of the telescope and thought the criticism was actually getting broader rather than getting narrower. And that's the dilemma here of finding the language that is accurate and precise, but at the same time fair, so that we're not having consequences that we don't mean to have.
Okay, and we're going to have to leave the answer there. Ms. Sahota, 5 minutes, please.
Okay, I'm gonna go off of what my colleague Julie was saying earlier. In the White Wing extremism section, it says that it may be difficult to assess in the short term to what extent a specific act was ideologically driven or comment while investigations are ongoing or cases are before the court. To one of my previous questions, it was mentioned that there are fluid investigations ongoing and that we would not want a plot to occur on Canadian soil. And I 100% agree with you. I would never want to see what had happened in '85 ever happen on Canadian soil again. And I hope you catch the people that are up to no good because they indirectly or directly in this case end up impacting whole communities at times. And I think all of us would be outraged if any religion, if Catholicism or Protestants were ever brought into any organization that had committed an act, and we wouldn't do that. But it seems like from this perspective, there's an insensitivity originally to other faiths that don't originate from the Western world. So in short, my question is, why wasn't the but language, which is included in the White Wing extremism section, included in those other sections? Because you're saying they are fluid investigations. So how do you know for sure whether they were ideologically driven? Because those exceptions are definitely referred to in the white extremism section.
David, can you comment on that?
Well, I can't, I'm not the author of the reports. I cannot comment for why exactly the final wording was there. But I can say from a CSIS perspective, as I mentioned earlier, we're not looking at, a specific religion. We're looking at the activity of individuals. And so if the activity of individuals is to use political, plotting to use violence to achieve political, ideological, or religious objectives, that's when we would be investigating. And some people, when you see, for example, the example of the New Zealand, this individual invoked about 5, 6, 7 reasons, of different reasons why he committed the activity. And so when you start to mix what is happening online with mental health issues and so on. What exactly was the motivator of an individual can be extremely delicate, to determine. So that's why for us, when we work, in the sphere of national security, when our colleagues in law enforcement, investigating, we may not know exactly what we're dealing with initially. So I can only speak to, the types of investigation, but I cannot, in terms of the report, why these other caveats were not added to the others. I cannot speak to that angle.
Okay. There has been a lot of skepticism after this report was released, and I have to ask that I had, from my investigations, found out, and from my talks with Minister Goodell, that about 17 different agencies and departments are involved in feeding into this report, and I don't think we got to that number.
That's approximately correct.
Okay. And that when compiling this report, no evidence is taken from any single source. Now, my question is can a single source be feeding allegations or evidence into all of these various different departments, and therefore when it comes out of more than a few departments, it elevates to the level of being in the report? But what are your comments on that?
I'll defer to David in terms of some of the source reporting from a CSIS perspective, but I can only repeat what you just said in terms of when we went out to those 17 agencies and departments representing the breadth and scope of the security intelligence community, we looked at all sources. And so everything that came up to us was intelligence, open sources, consultations with academics right across the board, so that what you see reflected in the report is a composite picture of all the evidence and all the intelligence and all the analysis, open source right on down.
Could it be
from across
bad
the spectrum.
intelligence coming from another country?
How
Or
would you
is-
define bad intelligence?
Is it verified intelligence by our own independent agencies?
I'll defer to David on this, but we are in regular consultation, without a doubt, with our allied partners, particularly in a Five Eyes context. So we're often looking at the intelligence that they provide as well. But at the end of the day, and maybe I should stop there and let David finish it off, but we are going to make our assessments, our own assessments. We will certainly look at what our allies are saying, but this is a Canadian assessment at the end of the day.
Mr. Vigneault is going to have to finish it off very quickly because we
Very
actually
quickly.
are out of time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Rigby well described, the way it is done. I mentioned in my first answer to you, Ms. Sauta, that it was based on our own investigations. So I want to be very clear, it was CSIS-led investigations. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I want to thank the minister and his colleagues for their attendance here in a thorough discussion of this issue. With that, we're going to suspend and then go in camera. So meeting suspended.